What is up, guys? Dave Wallace here, and I'm here to help you win with money and build your wealth. Inventories of diesel fuel have reached their lowest levels in 70 years in the United States, unnerving people across the country, including a broad spectrum of consumers and businesses alike. Last week, the Energy Information Administration announced that fuel levels of distillates were at the lowest level since 2008. The primary distillates are diesel, jet fuel, and heating oil. However, the tricky part about this is that back in 2008, the fuel crisis was happening going into the spring, whereas now it is happening going into the winter, when millions of Americans actually use heating oil to fuel the heat in their homes. When 1 out of every 5 homes in the Northeast actually heat their home using heating oil. So what caused this situation? Who's getting hit the hardest? How does it hit your wallet? And what the heck can be done about it? Let's talk about it. Before we get started, do me a favor, go ahead, hit that like button, hit the subscribe, and I appreciate it. Let's get into the video. This diesel shortage was actually caused by several issues converging all at the same time. The number one issue is the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia is one of the primary exporters of diesel fuel. In fact, prior to the war, Russia was exporting 700,000 barrels of fuel a day. Now, due to global sanctions, Russia is unable to export at that level. That is a portion of the global fuel supply that is now gone. Now European countries and the United States are now fighting over a smaller supply of fuel. That issue is actually being compounded also because the world, especially with green energy becoming such a huge thing with the current administration, oil refineries have been shutting down in the United States as a result of the world moving away from fossil fuels. And lastly, again, because the world is moving away from fossil fuels, there is very little incentive for businesses or entrepreneurs to go into the space to build refineries at this stage in the game. There's just not the incentive there to build these refineries out without public support and without knowing that fossil fuel will be a thing out into the future. Who is getting hit the hardest by this diesel fuel shortage? First off, it's important to know that diesel fuel is the workhorse of the economy. The consumer goods that you receive, the food that you receive, and the fuel that you receive, those are being delivered by trucks, ships, and by rail that are powered off diesel fuel. When there's a shortage of diesel fuel, the demand is squeezed and therefore the price is being ratcheted up. And so as that price goes up, the reality of the situation is it starts to affect both consumers and businesses alike, and it drives inflation because those costs get passed on to the end consumer, and the transportation costs are higher to get that product to you as a consumer. So the consumers and businesses, they're the first ones being hit. The consumer is being hit by the prices increasing. The business is being hit because in a lot of circumstances, they are not able to pass on the full burden of the price increase to the consumer just because of competition. So businesses get hurt as well in that regard, but they also get hurt by delays in shipping, by issues with actually being able to receive these goods and to stock their shelves with the things that people want and need at the right time. And lastly, farmers are being hit very hard by this diesel fuel shortage and the increase in prices. The reason being, farmers are not able to adjust their prices in the way that a normal business would. The prices and commodities are very much fixed, and they do not move the same way that consumer goods do. Therefore, Farmers are stuck paying these higher costs. It directly eats into their profits and makes life more difficult for us to get our most precious good, meaning our food, onto the table in a healthy and a sustainable way due to these supply chain problems. If you're like me, you're wondering, how does this impact your wallet? The first thing is that consumers should expect more inflation. Consumers should definitely expect increases in fuel price, consumer goods, food, and shipping costs. That definitely seems like the most obvious and straightforward byproduct of this diesel fuel shortage. And some might even argue is even worse. It should be expected that diesel fuel shortages can cause delays around the holidays. During Black Friday, during Christmas, we do see already a strain and an extra burden on the shipping and the transportation infrastructure here in the United States. Hopefully not, but we could expect to see shortages in terms of consumer goods making it there at all, or I would say probably the more likely scenario is that we could see that really just delaying things a little bit more. We're still at a 25-day supply, which albeit is low, especially comparatively speaking when you look at how much higher demand is now than it was back in similar times when we had only a 25-day supply of diesel fuel. Still, there are things that can be done. So let's talk a little bit about what can be done to help this situation. Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad Poor Dad, who is way smarter than me, says to buy a bunch of tuna. So let's talk about how this can be fixed. And I'm going to list this out in order of what I think is least likely to most likely. The war in Ukraine could stop. Now, I think this is the least likely scenario. Russia and Ukraine are engaged at this point in a war, and there is no sign of that stopping. So I don't see anything changing there. I do think that the sanctions are going to stay in place as long as that war is going on, thereby creating a shortage of Russian oil to the rest of the world. So that probably is not going to happen, but it could happen. The second option is that the U.S. could curb exports of fossil fuels to foreign countries. That, again, I think is not likely to happen. There has been some talk in the administration about that happening, but if that happens, the U.S. would then expect a retaliation from foreign countries as a result of it pulling away from contracts. And therefore, again, I don't think that that is a wise solution given the current situation. And the third option, which I think is the most likely and probably is what is going to happen, is simply for the U.S. to find partnerships to increase fuel supply. America is still the largest country, not in terms of population, but in terms of economic impact. Our ability to be able to negotiate with other countries still remains very high, and so I believe that a deal could be struck to increase supply. There's been talk about it. Hopefully that is the route that it will go, and I think that's most likely what all us normal people can expect to come. So, is this time to panic? I don't think so. I do believe that diesel prices will go up. So I do think we should be prepared for that. I do think that there could be further impacts to the supply chain. We already saw that happen during COVID. And so I would say get ahead of Christmas shopping, get ahead of any kind of shopping that you need to do. That way, if those impacts do happen, you are already ahead of it and you're not being impacted by increasing shipping costs due to fuel prices rising higher than they already are. I do think that we're going to be okay. I don't think we're going to run out of diesel fuel. I don't think people are going to be starving, nothing crazy like that. But I do believe that this has potential to impact us by causing delays and continuing to drive the prices up. Guys, thanks so much for all the love and support. Go ahead, if you haven't, make sure to hit that like button, smash the subscribe. That's all I got for you today. We'll keep an eye on this situation, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.